We decided to go a few minutes on the road to a Target, and we literally just walked around and around and around for 2 more hours. All of a sudden, it's like somebody literally flipped a switch. Before I knew it, it was just like I had been hit by a truck, and these contractions came in hard and strong and fast. It was just this like cold, it was like a room where they put all like the extra storage stuff. That was one of the hardest things because I was worried that like I was gonna have him in the toilet. I kid you not, I pushed for nearly 3 hours. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be the second part to my new Get to Know Me series. Each video is going to be uploaded on Wednesdays. This first video topic is going to be all about my first birth story, which is a crazy one, so let's get to it. To start off, I am a mom of 2 boys. I have a almost 4-year-old, he'll be 4 in August, and then I also have a 1-year-old who will be 2 in December. I am 24 and I had my first son when I was 20, and I turned 21 a few months afterwards. I turned 21 in December. I had him in August. I found out I was pregnant a few days after my 20th birthday, so I was just a little bit shy from being a teen mom. So I'm a very young mom. I was very scared. My husband and I were only together for a little bit before I got pregnant. It wasn't necessarily planned. I was also very excited because that's something I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to be a mom. And my pregnancy was pretty uneventful. I didn't have any issues with it. It was a very textbook pregnancy. I was in the military during the time, and I worked up until my very due date. So to kind of go straight into my story, I don't really have anything to share about my pregnancy because it was on my clip a few photos about like my pregnancy belly, maybe my maternity photos, and my 3D ultrasound that I got. But other than that, there's not really anything super eventful to share about my pregnancy. But my delivery story, on the other hand, is a completely different situation. This is something I carried for years. It's something that was very traumatic for me. I still, to this day, remember every single little detail about it. So today, that's what I want to share with you because I think that it's interesting, and it definitely kind of shows maybe like the side of like how the military hospital handled it, and just being a young mom, maybe not being as taken seriously as maybe if I was a little bit older. So I'm gonna go ahead and just jump into it. I have everything written down here, so if you see the paper coming in and out, that's what that is. But to start off, it was a day before my due date, and I had I think it was my 39-week checkup, maybe my 40-week checkup, but anyways, it was a day before my due date. And I go in to get checked, and I didn't really have like any contractions or anything like that, but I was at a 4, so I was 4 centimeters dilated. That day she decided to do a membrane sweep, which is when it separates the membrane from the sac that the baby is in. So I had that done, and from there I was let go from work just so I could try to induce labor, walk around a little bit. I was very pregnant at the point. I was almost 40 weeks pregnant, so they didn't really have as much use for me. So yeah, we went and walked around the mall for a couple hours, and around then is when I started bleeding. So I started bleeding, and at that point I knew that the hospital was 30-ish minutes away, 30 to 40 minutes away. And my mom actually has a history of very fast births. My sister was actually born in the car. So I was already scared that was going to happen to me. I was terrified of that because I was actually in the car when it happened. It was very traumatizing as well. So I started bleeding, and I decided to go in and get checked and make sure everything was okay. And we got to the hospital, and they said I was about a 5 to 6, more of a 5 than anything. And they usually say that they keep you around a 6, but I wasn't really having contractions or anything, just the bleeding. So they just decided they weren't going to keep me. It wasn't very busy then or anything like that. It was probably a very normal night for them, as to what it seemed when I went in and got checked and everything. Fun note that'll kind of come back up in a little bit later is that my husband actually worked there. So he worked in labor and delivery. This was all his co-workers. This is where I was giving birth, where he worked. So that's something to kind of remember. They said I was about a 5, and they decided that they were going to go ahead and have me walk for a couple more hours, see if my labor progressed anything. Like I said, I wasn't having any contractions, see if I dilated a little bit more. So we decided to go a few minutes on the road to a Target, and we literally just walked around and around and around for 2 more hours. At this point, I was exhausted. We've been walking for 4 hours. I hadn't eaten since lunch. It was close to like 8 o'clock by the time that we were at Target. And after the 2 hours were done at Target, we decided to go back and just see if anything progressed. I wasn't having any contractions still. I was just very tired and sore and just kind of over it. Because we had walked for 4 hours, and I had worked that morning before, and I was up probably around like 5 a.m. I hadn't really eaten that much that day, and also I was just heavily pregnant and walking that much. It was a lot. We headed back to the hospital, and I started to feel really discouraged that anything was going to happen because I wasn't having contractions. Just kind of felt like it wasn't going to happen that night. I was feeling pretty bummed about it. So we head back in, and a few minutes out from the hospital, I started to notice a few like tightening in the stomach, just feeling a little bit of cramping, but it wasn't still like I felt nothing was going to happen. It wasn't contractions that I was like, I am definitely in labor. So it didn't really mean anything to me then. But later on, I was like, oh, okay, maybe that's what it was. So we went in and get checked, and at this point, it was 2 hours later from when we originally came in, and it was swamped. Like, all of the rooms were full. Even the triage rooms where they check you in, there were literally ladies in there giving birth, and they usually don't do that. They decided to just like have me wait in the waiting room because they didn't know if they would be able to get me in, or they said I could go home. But we decided to just might as well get checked before I go home, because we did live 30 minutes away from it there as well. So I wouldn't want to have anything bad happen. So we're sitting in the waiting room, and all of a sudden it's like somebody literally flipped a switch. Before I knew it, it was just like I had been hit by a truck, and these contractions came in hard and strong and fast. So I was just in the waiting room, and I was crying and pacing. I couldn't sit. I was in an immense amount of pain. I kept going to the bathroom because it's something that happens when you're in labor. You go to the bathroom a lot. And all of the rooms were still full. There was nowhere to put me, and I was in a lot of pain. I didn't want to be in the waiting room. And so because my husband worked there, they were like, okay, well, there's these backup rooms that we have. They're not set up, but you can go in there so you're not out in the open and people are watching you be in this immense amount of pain. So we go into these back rooms, and we were in there for a few hours, and it was just this like cold, it was like a room where they put all like the extra storage stuff, and it wasn't anything. It was kind of dingy. And at that point, like I said, the contractions were fast and strong and hard, and I was in an immense amount of pain, and I had no idea what was like how close my contractions were, because I felt like they were right on top of each other. I felt like I didn't get any break in between them, couldn't keep track of them. I had a lot of pressure, and I was like freaking out, thinking, oh my gosh, this baby is gonna just like fall out, and I'm in this back room and no one is gonna like know what happened. I was terrified. I was doing a lot of like, they had a ball that I found, so I was like sitting on there doing that, and I did like some slow dancing with my husband. I was going to the bathroom a lot. That was one of the hardest things, because I was worried that like I was gonna have him in the toilet. So I'm laboring in this back room, and I'm worried that they forgot about me, and that there would be a room that I could have been in and I could have gotten my epidural, and that they forgot that I was back there. So I kept having my husband like go and check with them, like, hey, is there a room open? Is there a room open? She's in a lot of pain. So we're there for a few hours. Finally, they come in, they're like, all right, a room is open. They're cleaning it out right now. Let's go. So they ran me in there, and while they were still cleaning it, I was like stripping down. I was crying. It was just like I could hardly even walk. It was terrible. And I was just begging for an epidural. I was like, please, please let me get an epidural, because initially, like, I had no really experience with like breathing techniques or how to go through like a natural birth or like without medication. From the get-go, I was like, I'm gonna get an epidural, don't need to plan for anything else. Boy, was that a mistake. As I was begging for an epidural, they said that there were 2 mothers ahead of me before I could get my epidural, and it was just chaos. Like, they were back to back, and they were strong, and I felt like he was gonna come at any minute. I think they checked me maybe when I got back there. I don't remember her checking me, but I think she did. if I did, I had to have been like maybe a 7 at that point, a 7 or an 8, I'm not sure. But then I was in the room and I was crying and I was pacing and I was getting sick. I couldn't sit down, so they couldn't monitor how like quickly my contractions were coming because I couldn't sit still for them to monitor them. And finally the anesthesiologist comes and knocks and he's like, do you need an epidural? And I'm like, yes, let's get this done. The nurse is like, the way that she seems to be progressing, she's probably an 8 or 9 at this point. And he was worried that I wouldn't be able to sit still during the epidural. Because it's very important that you sit still. And my contractions were on top of each other and he was worried. But I said, you know what, I am determined to get this epidural. I need this epidural. Let's do it. Once I was getting my epidural, they were finally able to monitor my contractions, and they were one on top of another. They probably were maybe a minute long every 30 seconds or something like that. It had to have been something like where I wouldn't have noticed a break in between them because they were just coming so strong. I was definitely in the transitioning point, which is when you're transitioning from like active labor to ready to push the baby out. So I toughed through the epidural, and once I was done with all that, she checked me and I was at a 9. At that point, the labor stalled a little and I was stuck at a 9 for maybe 30 minutes to an hour, and so they decided to start me on Pitocin, which helps my contractions come back. And at that point, I get to a 10 off the Pitocin, and my water still hasn't been broken, so they go ahead and break my water, and they let me sit for a little bit and let me do some practice pushes. But an issue that I had was that my epidural worked like too well, so it got to the point where I couldn't feel anything, and so I couldn't feel like pushing. I had no idea I was pushing, I had no idea what I was doing. And also it was my first birth, so I didn't know how to do it, basically, especially when I can't feel it. At that point, they wanted me to start pushing because I'm complete and my water has been broken. And I kid you not, I pushed for nearly 3 hours. 3 hours I pushed, and he did not come out. It was awful. And this whole time I was on my back and I got exhausted. There's this term, I think it's called like maternal exhaustion, where the mom just like taps out and she can't give anymore to give birth. And that's usually when people get rushed away if it's a serious enough situation. But for me, he was already so engaged that there was nothing that was going to be done. I had to get him out somehow, some way. Something that started to happen, especially for me running out of steam, but his heart rate started to decel, so it means that he kept dropping and dipping in his heart rate, and it was terrifying. They were putting an oxygen mask on me. They were rolling me around, trying to make sure that he was okay. And eventually it got to the point where my doctor, so I had my doctor, I think she was just more junior or she was a resident, I can't quite remember. But there was another doctor that was like watching her, his most senior doctor, like on-call doctor. And I had a whole team around me, and it was probably because I was pushing for so long, but I had a whole team around me, and it got to the point where he tapped in, he was like, sorry about that, my camera died, so I'm back. Anyways, so it got to the point where the most senior doctor had to step in, and he was like, we have to get him out. I'm going to use forceps on you. Okay. Like, he needed to let me know that he was going to intervene, but it was so, like, he had to do it right now that I didn't even respond. He was just like, I'm going to do this. Okay. And then did it. And he just pulled him out. And, yeah, that was when he was born. He was very blue. His cord was actually wrapped around his neck a couple of times, so that's what was causing his heart rate to drop, because every time I had a contraction it would cause the cord to tighten around his neck. And he was just starting to come into distress because he was in the birth canal for so long, because I was pushing for 3 hours. So because of the situation where it was a traumatic birth and he had the cord wrapped around his neck, and he was obviously had lost some oxygen because he was so purple, they rushed him over, and I couldn't do skin to skin, which was one of the biggest things that really did bother me, besides the fact that I felt like I didn't really push him out because they just like had to pull him out. He ended up being healthy. He was very small. He was 6 pounds 1 ounce. He was like in the 5th percentile, just because I'm kind of small as well, so it made sense I wasn't gonna make really big babies. Yeah, he was healthy, and I was eventually able to do lots of skin to skin with him. I was able to breastfeed him. We had to wait for a while for a postnatal care room to open up because it was so busy that night. So what had happened that night was it was actually a full moon, and I think it was also like Friday the 13th or something. Earth to Taylor, when is your son's birthday? And he was actually ended up being born on his birthday. I think you meant due date. He was born that next morning at 6 a.m. So they had to do a lot of needle sticks to his heel to check his blood sugar for the next 24 hours just because he was such a small birth weight. We waited about 4 hours for our room, and then we finally were able to get in one. It's funny, actually, later on, maybe like 6 months later, I worked in the immunizations clinic and I had a mom come down for her child's shots, and he was born on the same day. And I was like, oh, well, our kids had the same birthday. And she's like, oh yeah, it was quite the night that night, wasn't it? And I was like, yeah, it was. And she's like, yeah, did you hear that lady screaming? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, that was me. I delivered in the waiting room. I was like, oh my gosh, thank goodness for one that wasn't me. But also I felt awful for her. I couldn't even imagine like getting birth in a waiting room. And we had both talked about how we had originally both planned on having epidurals, and then it kind of went awry, and she actually didn't get an epidural, and I felt so bad for her. But yeah, so I wasn't the only one that had a very traumatic experience that night. One of the things that was probably most upsetting for me is the fact that we were turned away initially. I understand because I wasn't like in active labor, but I was at a 5, and if I had just been kept and like monitored there for a little bit, I could have had a room. It could have been a completely different experience, but because they sent me away when I came back, it was a completely different time. Everyone decided they were going to go into labor at that point. So that is pretty much it. I was going to kind of go over my recovery, but it's not as interesting. I think I might do a separate video when I talk about like my postnatal recovery and just what it's like, because that's definitely a topic for another time. It's a whole video in itself, just after having babies. Soon-to-be moms want to know just what it's like after having a baby, the realistic aspects of it. So I think that's definitely something later on in my channel I'm definitely going to go over. So now he's a wonderful, rambunctious, loud little boy. He loves outside and trucks and blocks, and he's the best little boy that we could have ever had. He is who made me mom, so it's always going to be a special time in my heart, but it was definitely one of the most traumatic experiences of my life, for sure. I, to this day, still feel that negative aspect of it because it was just so traumatic for me. It was not what I wanted at all, and I feel like I was failed in some areas. Like I could have probably had a different experience if maybe they just took me a little seriously. When I was bleeding, they were like, oh, it's nothing. But it was a lot of blood, and I know that it was probably something, but that's okay. Things happen, and I ended up having a wonderful nurse. She was by my side even after her shift ended until I was like completely taken care of. She was amazing, and I'm so thankful for that. And I'm so thankful for that doctor that stepped in when he needed to. He knew that he had to do something, and because for all I know, it could have been a completely different outcome. So I'm thankful for that as well. So that is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I told it well enough, because I really want to convey how chaotic of a story it is. In my next video, highlight what I like to call my therapeutic birth, because my second birth was completely different than my first birth, and I feel like it kind of gave me back that beautiful sense of giving birth, because for my first one it wasn't anything but beautiful, and I feel like I was cut short on that aspect of it. So I feel like I would have, for all I know, because of the way my first birth went, I probably would have never had kids again, but thankfully I had another, and it was a perfect birth, and my idea of a perfect birth, and I'm so thankful for that. I'm so thankful for both of them. So that is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like it if you did, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can see the next videos that are coming up. Like I said, on next Wednesday I'll be doing my second birth story, and this Friday coming up I'm going to be doing Clean With Me. I think I'm going to be doing a speed clean routine that I like to do sometimes, So yeah, keep a lookout for that, and thank you so much for watching. Bye!